Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for making the time to be here today. This session, as you can see from the title, is aimed at supporting smaller organisations, but everyone is welcome, and I think we've got a few of our partners and other supporters of small organisations. It's the first time that we're running this session. Leah and I just pulled it together in the last month or so. So any feedback would be gratefully received so that we can support other small organisations in this area. So just a little bit about us. I'm Antonia from Coalition for Efficiency. My colleague Angela is there somewhere in the chat. It's just two of us. We're a very small charity, but with a wonderful network of volunteers and partner organisations. We provide practical advice and support to help specifically smaller organisations get started on their impact measurement journeys and progress their journeys. We nurture relationships between highly skilled volunteers who use their expertise to make a difference in these smaller organisations. And that helps us keep our programmes and support low cost. And our strategic partnerships with organisations like Superhighways, where Kate is from, and with people like Leah are sort of fundamental to the way that we work. So that's us. Over to you, Leah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So my name, as Antonia said, is Leah Salinger, and I'm a consultant working in the voluntary sector. I'm almost up to 2 decades of working in the sector, and my background is actually in income generation and fundraising. But I've been working as a consultant for the last 9 years, mostly working with small organisations to help them think about how they can be more sustainable and more resilient. So that's looking at their income generation, their governance, their strategy, but of course, cutting across all of those things, how they measure and how they talk about, in particular, their impact to help them with that sustainability. As Antonia said, I've worked with Coalition for Efficiency in the past, doing some little projects with them, just bringing my insight, and hopefully I'll be using that today to back up what Antonia is saying. So lovely to meet you all.
Thanks, Leah. So very sort of overview of a very simple session outline. I'm going to just start the first probably 10 minutes or so doing a quick overview of where we feel impact reporting sits instead of diving straight into it. So this might be new for some of you who are joining, maybe from smaller organisations, and for others, you might be very familiar with this. So we will do some signposting to useful resources, and I won't spend too much time on that first part. I mean, you can run day-long sessions on that first point. But essentially the message we want to get across is it's sort of go back to basics before jumping straight into reporting. And just picking up on what I was saying earlier, that we are developing this session because we've received quite a bit of feedback and questions and requests for support from small organisations with very limited resources, often entirely volunteer-led, who don't have the time or capacity to develop longer impact reports, but still know that they're making a difference, are collecting useful data, and want to find a sort of practical way of communicating it. So this is a response to that, and we're still evolving it. So like I said, any feedback is welcome, and we would like the session to be as interactive as we can make it. So there will be a couple of Mentimeter polls, there's going to be a Google Sheet, and we'll also try and leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And there's also an option for you to request to share your audio if you want to share some of your thoughts and experiences. So moving on. Right, so I think a few people have done Mentimeter as part of the conference so far, so hopefully it's not new to too many of you. So you can click onto Mentimeter, or also do it on your phone. I can also share this link, which should take you straight to it as well. Just a couple of questions, simple questions for you to have a think about. So if you're able to participate, we would really appreciate that. And Leah will then, Leah's sharing her screen so we can see the results. So first question, if you click on the link, that should pop up. How confident would you say you are about creating your own impact report? And then once you've answered that question, you should be able to go on to the next question.
You can do this on a smartphone if you need to as well, just by entering the web address menti.com and then the number, which I put in the chat for you as well, 54603822. So if you did want to, if you're worried about going off hopping and clicking on the link, then you can also do it on a smartphone. I'm just going to reload it and make sure it's refreshed. Ah, there we go. Just needs a bit of nudging along.
I was sort of feeling a bit nervous about the blank columns there, but thank you. That's great. Thanks for participating.
Fantastic. So let me move on to the next question. You can do that.
Well, for the person who feels very confident, please feel free to share your expertise with us. And great. So, do you mind reading a few out, Leah? Because it's
a bit harder to see. Yeah. So this is the question: what do you want to communicate? Why do you want to communicate your impact? So we've got sharing learning with the sectors. A few people have suggested that. Ensure the mission is being objective for funders to raise awareness. Think about other stakeholders, and we're going to talk about that later. Help us learn what's working and improve it, and to tell our story, show what we've had. Raise our profile again. Yeah, so lots of things around talking about the stories. Because what we do we do work that matters. I like that one. That's nice. Yes, and you should be sharing your impact because what you do does matter. I like that. Fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you. And there will be another little poll at the end, but thank you for sharing that.
One sec. Just flicking backwards and forwards between screens. Sorry.
And then Leah, I think because it's not on the slides, we were going to ask a question about. So those are your reasons for wanting to communicate impact. Do some of you want to share just in the chat function some of the challenges you face, whether you're a small organisation or a large organisation or supporting others? What are some of the challenges that you face when it comes to communicating and reporting on your impact? If you want to share a few in the chat, and just to make sure that Leah and I can address them as we go through this session. So what are the challenges that you face? Okay. It's a challenging one, Zoe.
Well, flying in.
And thanks, this is just really useful information for us generally. So if we don't cover all of this, we can come back to it and share it with our partners as well.
So there's definitely things about time and detail and knowing what to include. That seems to be a common theme.
Yeah.
Getting hold of the information.
Yeah.
Balancing qualitative and quantitative.
Yeah. And a lot of these challenges are linking more broadly to sort of impact measurement and management. So I think what we won't be able to respond to all of those today, and some of them are big questions. So we are going to focus more specifically on actually kind of pulling your information together and communicating it to specific stakeholder groups when you have very limited resources and capacity. Mm-hmm. But yeah, these are all very valid challenges when it comes to sort of just broader impact practice.
And hopefully we're going to address some of the comments around just what tools can you use to kind of, get the message across. And we're definitely going to talk a bit about that today and do some signposting as to the kind of tools you might want to look at using as well.
Yeah, and Kate's question, what do we focus on when we do a really wide range of work? We'll sort of try and address that. And I think, yeah, prioritising is key to that when it comes to sort of picking out what it is that you want to communicate to. Okay, thank you all for that. So we'll just go back. I'm just going to run through a few slides. And as I said before, there are going to be varying levels of impact knowledge in this group. And so I'm going to move through reasonably quickly, but I just want to make sure that we're kind of starting from the right place, because this conference has been sort of very, very focused on data across different areas of the organisation, and we're looking a bit more specifically at impact practice, and how to communicate your impact. So many different definitions. Essentially what we're talking about in the context of when it's sort of impact reporting, impact practice is the difference that we're making through your activities, services, products, programs. When you talk about sort of impact, we often mean the longer term or macro effects. They can be positive or negative, intended or unintended. But in the context of our work and our work as small organisations, and in terms of measuring and reporting it, it's the changes that result from our interventions for the people and the communities that are affected by them. So these can be impact for your intended groups and communities, or kind of wider stakeholder groups and indirect beneficiaries as well. So just sort of more broadly speaking, what we mean when we talk about impact, the difference that we're making. And then when we talk about sort of impact measurement and management, if we move on to the next slide, just a few definitions here. So if you're not already familiar with it, the Inspiring Impact website is a really fantastic resource if you're starting out, and just looking for useful resources. And they have helpful, clear language and definitions, and useful jargon buster. And so if we look more broadly before we dive into the communicating and reporting, it's just sort of understanding more broadly what we mean by measurement and management. And that last point around learning and improving versus showing and proving. So I think that's probably the most important thing to focus on here, is always coming back to your why. So some of that came up in the Mentimeter answers, like, why do you want to communicate your impact? And there'll be similar answers to, why do you want to measure your impact? Why is it important? And there isn't one answer, but it's really important for you as an organisation, as a team, as a partnership, as a network, to be clear on that. And sort of, what are the questions you're seeking to ask? There's a really useful guide that we'll share the link to, an NPC guide, if you're kind of quite new to this, called Understanding Impact. Really useful guide to help you link your theory of change to a measurement framework, and also really think about the reasons that are driving your desire to measure your impact. Help you think about questions around, how much did we do? Is anyone better off? How well did we do it? Etc. And just sort of something to add in terms of reporting when it comes for sort of like charity reporting, if you're reporting back to the Commission and in your annual accounts. Often annual accounts really are just sort of reporting on financial data, maybe some output data, but it's really not telling the full story. So that's, in a sense, that's what we want to be capturing with an impact report. What's changed, what's worked, what's missing, what's the difference that we have made. And then in terms of where it fits into the cycle, if we move on to the next page, this is the sort of impact practice cycle. And if we look at those 4 steps, starting with planning, and if you're new to impact measurement or wanting to revisit it, this is where you always want to come back to the planning phase. So how do you create the desired impact? What does that look like? What are the problems that you're addressing? Do you need to do some kind of issue tree or problem tree to really understand it? Who do you want to reach? What secondary data is available to help you sort of feed into the assumptions? You may want to develop a theory of change at this point. and a measurement framework, but really it's sort of that planning stage is really important to get right. To start with, you don't need to get it right and perfect each time, and often that can be a barrier, and you can start small with just one project and then sort of go around the cycle and come back and expand it. But you certainly want to start with the planning before just sort of trying to report on what you've done without having a clear idea of what your desired impact is. The doing phase is around actually collecting the information. And the assessing phase, I think we've covered. There have been some really useful sessions this week on drawing out insights and trends, and how to sort of, analyze the data that you've collected, whether that's quantitative or qualitative. And then it's this review stage where the kind of reporting on and communicating your impact comes in. So it's sort of drawing, based on those insights and those trends, how does that feed into your decision making for whether it's a specific program or across the organization? How are you going to, what have you learned? How are you going to adapt? How are you going to improve? And then who do you need to communicate that to, and why? How are you going to communicate that message? And then the cycle keeps going round and round. So very quick whistle-stop tour of where we feel impact reporting fits in, but important to have that foundation. The next slide is really just for those of you who are newer to this, and just to think about certain considerations for that doing bit, so collecting the information that you're then going to want to draw insights on and report on. There is lots of help available. There's the DataWise London initiative has done some really useful trainings on sort of qualitative and data essentials. We've got some useful learning labs on our YouTube page, which we can share with you. So it's about really kind of brushing up on what the difference is between the two, what are the different ways of collecting information, what does that balance look like, what should you consider. If you're a smaller organization, is the amount of data collection you're doing proportionate to the size? As our friends at Social Value UK say, enough precision for the decision, which I think is helpful to bear in mind. And remember how useful secondary data can be. There are some fantastic kind of data banks and resources available. Quite a few have been presented this week as well, to help you back up your assumptions or kind of fully help you with that planning stage. And of course, different ethical considerations, making sure you're not doing any harm in your data collection, you've got informed consent, you're thinking about including the right people within your data sets, etc. So that's a sort of understanding impact, where it all fits in. Where is the data going to come from? What do you need to think about? These are the 5 types of data. There's actually going to be a session later on that NPC are running. I think it's in an hour or so. So if you're not familiar with this framework, I strongly recommend signing up for that. And there are some really useful resources as well explaining this. I think a lot of organizations and supporters of organizations have picked up on this framework just because it's so clear and practical. So in terms of, and again, this is the data that is that would feed into the impact report. And so you might collect that user data through CRM systems and mailing lists, the engagement data, how are your users actually engaging with your service? So that might be through booking systems, finance management systems, feedback data through surveys, through conversations, through Mentimeter if you're doing things online. And outcomes data, you might be collecting that through surveys again, interviews, focus groups, other methods. And there are small charities who are managing to collect that sort of longer term impact data. But you're doing a very good job if you are collecting those earlier 4 levels, and the impact data tends to be larger organisations or partnerships doing bigger research projects and impact analyses. But like I said, there's going to be a session later on and lots of resources available to help you understand those different levels of data in a bit more detail. So that's my sort of intro bit. We're now jumping into actually communicating your impact and reporting on your impact as a small organisation. So we've broken it up into 3 sections. The first on who you trying to communicate your messages to, who you're talking to. So Leah's going to take you through really useful exercise there. The second part, we're going to think about, well, what to share and what to include in an impact report, what to leave out. And then the third section is a bit more on the sort of how and where to share it. And so just a bit more on that now in terms of formats that you may already have experimented with. So you know, there are already the written formats that we're going to be familiar with, like just traditional longer impact reports. And so you've got, so the written form in impact reports, newsletters, website copies. There might be spoken formats as well. So we're seeing more and more podcasts and videos and presentations, and then also visual ways of communicating your data. Ollie Carrington's Data Viz session yesterday was brilliant for that. So I recommend taking a look. So we'll cover some of that towards the end and think about how digital tools might be able to help make the job a bit easier for us, but start with who it is that we're wanting to communicate to.
Brilliant, thank you, Antonia. So we have thought about what impact is, and Antonia's taken us through that really beautifully. But what is the point of it? Why are we doing this? And some of you actually addressed this really nicely in the Mentimeter we thought of at the beginning. And a few of you did mention funders and external stakeholders. And I think it really goes beyond that. And I think actually impact can be so much more. And sometimes we don't always think about how it can help us with recruitment or maintaining our staff and keeping our staff engaged, and volunteers, board members included in that, and also beneficiaries, how the people we want to engage with, or we are looking to engage with, or we are working with as beneficiaries of our organisations. Actually, all of these stakeholder groups potentially have something to gain from learning about the impact you're having. But what do they want to hear? And we're going to try, Antonia said at the beginning of the day, we're going to try and make today, because it's a 90-minute session, as interactive as possible. So I'm going to ask you that question. What do they want to hear? And we're going to try. It may not work. We'll see how we get on with this. But Antonia has just shared a link to a Google Doc in the chat, which we'll share with you on the screen in a moment. For those of you who can't access it, you can see what's there. And there's 2 pages on the Google document. I just want you to spend 5 minutes just adding your thoughts in relation to these questions. Who do you want to hear about your impact? Do they all want to hear the same thing, or are there differences? So do think about those 5 types of impact, and particularly those first 3 around user data, engagement data, and feedback data. So who do you want to hear that information? And what do they want to hear? Is it the same thing? Is there other differences? So it's going to give you a few minutes to have a look at the Google Doc. I'm going to stop the share of this screen and bring up the Google Doc. Bear with me 1 second while I do that. And then you'll all be able to see. But do start commenting on that as we go. Brilliant. Some of you are on there already, which is fantastic. If you bear with me 1 second, I will share that with you. Now I've got it open. Find the right screen. So many screens. There we are. Fantastic.
And yeah, don't worry about there will obviously be lots of repetition. This was just the best option we had, because we realised that Jamboard has a limit.
25 people limit, and we've got 73 of you on today, so it wouldn't have worked. But
you just got to find your space.
find your space, start typing. We'll see what happens. Yeah, Jamboard would have been better, but unfortunately, 25 people. I thought we've got a limit of 500 or something. I think we looked at, didn't we, on Google Docs? We thought it should be all right. So there's the first one, and then if you wanted to scroll down there, it's gone off onto the 3rd page. Then you can also start adding some things around. Do they want to hear the same thing, or are there differences as well? So I'll keep on the first one just for now. We might do a bit of editing, Antonia, just to bring it onto 1 page. But brilliant. You guys are great. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. can you see the screen all right, Antonia? Just make sure you can. Yeah, great. So lots of different stakeholder groups appearing on here. Some of the ones I've mentioned, so community groups as well, partner organisations. So lots of you thinking about staff, volunteers, government, I guess potential supporters or policy campaigning type organisations might be looking to influence government as well. Members, another one thought of. So servitude local commissioners, absolutely. Fantastic, loads of really good examples here. I'm not sure that's an official one. Brilliant, really good stuff. Just give a couple more minutes, and here we are. So some of you, loads of stuff down here as well on whether you want to hear the same thing or are there differences. So lots of you definitely think there are differences as a common theme. Differences for sure. Someone's not messing around with that one. Absolutely. So some people have gone into a little bit more detail about the kinds of differences you're wanting to see here. So funders want to know numbers, participants want to hear about the other voices, trustees and staff want to hear stories of change. And some good comments here, Antonia, about being transparent. How honest are you with your impact reporting? It's a really interesting question, isn't it? It's been raised there. So you're thinking about, absolutely, a lot of you are really thinking about what is it that stakeholders want to learn, what kind of data or information are they thinking about, what sorts of things might they want to hear. So some more things about honesty, qualitative, quantitative. Brilliant, some really good stuff there. Thank you guys, it's really helpful. Is there anything you've picked up, Antonia, just for me moving through that quickly?
I mean, no, just the lots of common themes, and the main one just being that, just very, it's the challenges catering, having different messages and catering to those different audiences. What to choose to include and exclude.
Yeah, and it's how do you do that without reinventing the wheel, because you can't collect different impact data for each stakeholder group and present it completely differently. So it's about how do we think about, how do we capture what your phrase, I should have written it down because it was brilliant. The about the kind of
enough precision for the decision.
That's the one I like that. But that's it. And then actually the precision here is about being precise enough to get the messages across you want to get, but without having to reinvent the wheel and do a different impact report for every single stakeholder group, because as we see on this section at the top here, there are an awful lot of them. So how do you do that? Fantastic. Thanks everyone for that. I'm just going to just stop the share of that particular screen for a moment. But thank you very much for your input there. That's really helpful. And I think you're absolutely right in all of you put there. There are lots and lots of stakeholder groups, as you expressed, and some will want to hear more quantitative information, some will want more qualitative, some will want stories, some want numbers, as somebody had put. But actually, what we think is there's some kind of commonality here. There's some things that everyone wants to hear, and how you don't reinvent the wheel, how you keep people how you keep your impact report quite focused, but allow that breadth inside. Some of the things we're going to look at a little bit today. So before we move on and get into some of that, I just wanted to know if there is anyone who's really wants to share their thoughts at this point, and we can invite you to the invite you onto screen, and you can see what you look like. I'm sure that'd be lovely. So what you look like, and just have a quick conversation. So we've got a bit of time. So if you comment in the chat, and then I think we can upgrade you from there. So if you fancy putting your hand up, let us know in the chat, say hello, and say I'd like to speak, and we can bring you in and have a conversation with you. Everyone's going to be really shy now, Antonia, aren't they? I don't want to be on screen.
There's no pressure, and we can always bring people on at the end when we do the Q&A.
Exactly. And then hopefully you can use the chat to comment and talk to us as well. If you don't want to come on the screen, that's fine. You can just use the chat and say, don't flag me, don't bring me on. Oh, fantastic, Chris, wonderful. Right, now we're going to work out how to do it, haven't we? Oh, that's not the right one. So,
Sophie, can you help us get Chris in the room? One moment.
We said we could do it, now we don't know how, do we?
Let's see if Sophie can help. Christopher, is there an option for you to request to join or ask to share audio? see if that works. Otherwise, we'll.
Oh, there we go. Yes, brilliant. There we go. Well done, Chris.
Hello.
Gold stars.
Yay!
I'm in Technicolor.
Welcome to the session.
That's worse. Right. So basically, my role is a new position within the charity. I'm the data management officer, and they've had no data strategy or ways of measuring what we're doing, an impact analysis to actually inform future provision. So I'm new to kind of this, and I'm looking at ways, right, how can I contribute to the organization by providing them with the sort of information that is required to impact the organization. So I kind of get overwhelmed by the masses of data that is there available to me, and I'm just looking for pointers and ideas to make a valued contribution to it.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Christopher. And I think that's what we just saw on those documents as well, wasn't it? The kind of the diversity and the breadth of who we're talking to about impact and what they want is really common. Now, I'm sure Antonia can probably speak much more fluently on this, but for me, it's about distilling what is important about your organisation. What's the message you want to get across to any of those stakeholders, and understanding what's important for you and what you want to communicate is where to start from. Because if we started from trying to answer each one of those stakeholder groups, we just get lost in, like as you say, in that plethora and myriad of data that we wouldn't know where to start. So actually starting with what's important, what's the story you want to tell? What are you proud of? You know, what should people know about you? Because start from that point, and then think about what data you can use to help you pin that down. That would be my starting point. Antonia, you have something else to offer?
Yeah, I think even organisations with large impact and learning teams accept that they can't possibly kind of capture everything. So that you do need to make those decisions, which is why we spent a few minutes at the beginning talking about that impact cycle, because it comes back to that planning stage. You want to make sure there's alignment. You want to make sure you're drawing in different people from the organisation and from different teams, so that you agree on what it is that you want to collect information from. What you then decide to report on, you can probably tweak that. But when it actually comes to sort of building your measurement framework and deciding what those measures are going to be and what kind of information you want to know, and then because it is a cycle, you can get to that fourth bit and think, oh, and get feedback, say, from an impact report, from a funder, or from someone saying, there wasn't enough information on your lessons learned, or there was information missing about certain target groups or a certain program. You go back into the planning phase and tweak it and say, okay, well, we're going to ask less of that data, more of that, and then it's a constant iterative process. It is a real challenge, Christopher, for organisations large and small. But I think, it's kind of really doing some work around that planning phase and getting alignment. If you're a small...
sorry. Because I think I agree with Leah in that I love that quote that you actually said, enough precision for the decision. I think that is a good thing to keep in mind.
Exactly. And it just needs to be practical, and it comes back to sort of making it proportionate for the size of the organization. Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know if you can remove yourself, Christopher, or if we have to remove you.
Yes, I can. I can leave. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye. Right, if there's anyone else who wanted to, then please do let me know. As Sarah's put in the chat, you can just click the blue button to share audio and video. Otherwise, I think we'll move on, shall we, Antonia?
Yeah. Okay. Great.
No one else there. Okay. Brilliant. I'll Oh no, here we go. Just another little point here from Tio. Then funders are being presented with quantitative, heavy, experimental, quasi-experimental approach to the evaluation of the project they're funding, but the implementation of the activities of the project does not allow the evaluator to carry out such an impact evaluation. Okay. Yeah. So it's another challenge to doing impact effectively. Basically, yeah, it's difficult to do what funders are requiring. I think is the point there.
Yeah. And some dialogues with funders are easier than others, and I think quite a few funders have adjusted their sort of reporting approaches and requirements, and I think especially this last year there has been a shift. But maybe we can come back to discussing that at the end, Tio.
That sounds good.
Right, we're now going to go into. I'm slightly. This is just. It's a kind of draft template, draft idea based on a few conversations with partners and friends, and it's not going to respond to all of the challenges and needs that you've already outlined. It's just an idea for small organisations to pull together, and going back to what Leah was saying, what is it that you're really proud of and that you want to shout about and that's really important to share? And what else is also important to share that maybe you're less proud of, but you feel that there needs to be that kind of transparency and that people need to know about? What's practical? What can you do when maybe you don't have someone helping with you don't have sort of a comms officer and you're just a small team and a couple of you doing everything, for example? What's practical? And so there's this idea of a one-page impact report, essentially an impact summary. It can be more than one page if you want it to be. So we've come around to that fourth part of the cycle. And you then need to capture, it's trying to think about, well, what are you going to pull into this one-page impact report? It's going to look very different to your measurement framework and to all the different measures and pieces of data that you're collecting, because you're going to be collecting them for other reasons and for internal reasons and thinking about the quality of your services and everything else. So your one-pager isn't trying to capture all of that, but it's distilling, okay, what is it important? What is important to communicate? Thinking about all of those different stakeholders that you've mentioned in that Google Doc. What are those key messages? The idea initially must credit Steve Coles. I don't know if some of you who've been working in the impact space for a while may have come across him. He set up Intentionality, which has since closed. But we've had a few conversations with him and thought about how we might sort of tweak and edit some of the suggestions. So these aren't the exact categories that Intentionality came up with. They're just an idea for the sort of 10 points that to consider including in your impact report. So it's a practical approach if you're starting out and you've never kind of properly communicated your impact more widely beyond just reporting back to funders in sort of grant reports. It also can be quite a useful exercise if you have done longer impact reports but found that it's actually not feasible to keep doing one every year or periodically. So it can actually really be a good exercise to help you condense into one page or two what's really important for you, and also think about, you could have decide to have a one-pager for different program strands if it's hard to kind of bring it all together and distill it. I think when Steve developed this, he was working with small startup social enterprises to develop this, it was kind of quite easy to capture everything on one page. So just think about adapting it, what's going to be practical, what's going to be useful for you, who are you communicating it to, and making it clear and accessible. So here's just an idea for some sort of different areas, not for you to use the template as such. We've shared a link in case it's helpful just to make notes. So just starting from the beginning, what to include. So obviously, your name of the organization, maybe be specific if you're just reporting on the impact of one specific program. It might be the name of a partnership or a joint initiative. Important to mention the time frame. Is it a sort of kind of COVID-19 impact report? Or does it cover a specific financial period? Then you want to mention something, and again, this is not going into sort of details and long lengthy narratives, but if you're using, you can use hyperlinks to, if you have got longer research or there's secondary research that you want to include, so you can keep the problem definition or the issue that you're addressing reasonably brief, but just make it very clear, so the reader can understand essentially the why of your organisation or of your programme. Yeah, what are you trying to help fix? Then sort of mission, programs, target groups, you might want to tweak that. Are you doing it for the whole organization, for something specific? And then how is it that you're kind of seeking, you know, what activities are you delivering, and who's it for? Then it's coming into those data levels that we've mentioned. So you've got 4, 5, and 6 to think about what, and you're not going to be able, it's not feasible to communicate every single measure that you might have in your measurement framework, but what are some of those headline figures that you feel are really important to draw out? So that might be something in terms about your users, sort of how many people you're reaching. There might be something around engagement. So how often are they engaging with your different services? Have you managed to collect some outcome data and maybe even some impact data, or can link to impact data? Feedback and testimonials, and can you use sort of audio and visual links, for example? We'll come on to some of the digital tools, but have you got any kind of quotes or even links to case studies to include there? And it might be that you can use a few sort of data visualization tools, referring again to Ollie's presentation. Is there something kind of graphic that can help to capture the information, really for any of these, but especially for sort of 4 and 5 to help communicate things in a more visual way. This point around lessons learned, and I think this is where we want to all kind of push ourselves to be more transparent and to be kind of bolder about sharing what it is that hasn't gone right, or perhaps where the gaps are, or what we might have done differently. And so I think this is something that should be, whether you're doing a shorter summary or a longer report, you know, we all need to see more of this, because none of us are getting everything perfect each time. And you know, and even when things are going well, it's just really trying to dig into the why. So making sure we're really sharing that. And it's this idea of then looking forward. Is there something, you don't just want your impact report to be kind of capturing what's happened. How is that then feeding in, and looking ahead and being more forward looking. There might be other highlights that you want to include, so links to partnerships that you're proud of, other impact related news and awards, maybe an accreditation, and then sort of contact info and social media. So really kind of a simple list, and reasonably kind of obvious list, I would say. Sort of it makes sense, but I guess the challenge is then making sure that you've got those building blocks in place to be able to draw on that data and then easily update it. And then in terms of moving to the next slide, Leah, like how to actually present it. So there's sort of 2 approaches. Well, there are lots of different approaches, but I think that we just, you know, certainly the impact 1 pages that I saw from intentionality days was just a PDF document with 2 columns with sort of headline info. So you can use sort of apps and formats that you're already familiar with, that you're used to using within your organization. And you know, maybe bring in a bit of color with a few photos, some data viz, using links to other content. So that's just one way you can just get started and do it now. And then also we're learning to be a bit bolder, so through our friends at Superhighways, getting more confident about using some digital tools. So we've got Canva and picture charts. So some of you might be familiar with these tools already. And we would really encourage you to experiment with them, because they can make some really beautiful posters and infographics, and then also can then be easily updated. So if you decide you're gonna do an impact report for an organization or a specific program on a yearly basis, you can update the information more easily. There is a free premium account for nonprofits with Canva, so we will make sure that we share that link. Highly recommend it. It's free for the premium account and not too onerous to sign up. And we are also thinking, talking to Superhighways about potentially running a kind of follow-up session to this, sort of tweaking and improving the session as best we can, but then having a follow-up session or a second part to it where we actually help you to learn how to develop your skills around Canva and picture charts, so you can find your way around a bit more easily.
So we're going to look at a couple of examples now, just to try and bring to life some of those things. So I've highlighted the points from Antonia's what you might include in a one-page impact summary. We've just picked some examples of impact reports, which we're not saying are the best. We're not kind of saying these are fantastic, but we're going to show you just some different ways that people have used tools like Canva and Pictograph and just normal formatting, so Word documents, just to try and get across some of those points. So we're just going to look at a few things and see where they have included some of those elements or not. So the first one we're looking at is the Blue Cross Animal Review. So that's an animal support charity. This is actually their review from 2018, and it's part of an annual review, but it's kind of an impact highlight centre spread. So for me, it's quite a nice one-pager of how you do it. On the front cover, with our things we've got, so you can look through that list, see which things you can spot there. So I think we've got a few of them here. We can see the name, logo, time frame. It's 2018. It's what organisation it's from, and we can see who's being helped. Yes, it's pets clearly, but it's also people who've lost pets, those who work with horses. And we get to see how they've been helped as well. So what kind of things, what activities are taking place, what the outputs are. So number of welfare team visits. And we've seen, just makes it clear by using things like the telephone icon we can see on the screen, the bottom left of the grey box, just gives us an idea that there's a telephone helpline. So using imagery alongside some simple numbers and simple data just gives a really good sense of some of the outputs of the organisation. And likewise, the same thing for outcomes, the number of pets helped or number of pets fostered, for example. They've also chosen to feature some of the highlights. A lot of them you could count as highlights, but they've also flagged, their work in Wales and Scotland, helping us understand their impact is beyond direct service delivery, but also about campaigning and policy work as well. So this is taken from a longer document. It also includes case studies, which have feedback and testimonials alongside, and a call to action, which is about donations, for example, at the back, alongside some contact information. But just visually, it's a very simple and not complex to pull together way of just displaying some impact across lots of different areas. The next example we're going to look at is from a much smaller organisation. This is a charity that both Antonia and I work with called Selfa. They're based in North Yorkshire, and they're a much smaller organisation. Their turnover is around £250,000, and they work, as you can probably tell, with children and families. These 2 pages represent their impact report, which sits inside their annual report. So they've included it there, but they've made it visually accessible. So some of the information we might expect to see isn't here, and that's fine. We don't have to have everything on these pages. But I really like this because I feel what Selfa have done is clearly and simply just used a few graphics and images, which again, not done on any complex programs or anything difficult to do, just to convey a sense of what they do, the need they address, and the impact they make. We get a sense of the work and the target group from the numbers, location, age, gender information, and the numbers, the outputs listed at the bottom. And we get really clear what the outcomes are. So children's need to find a place to improve their mental health, develop positive relationships, and so on. And these things are emphasised with those case studies, which include those quotes from the children's parents as well. So again, very simple, not complex, using a lovely mixture of imagery, graphics, to get those points across. See. We've ticked quite a lot of the boxes on this one. So if we want a great one-pager and we have it, let's say we do it, fantastic. We use the right tools, we get it all together. That's fantastic, wonderful. Where do we talk about it? What do we use for that? Well, as we saw, the examples we just looked at were part of annual reports, and that can be a really effective way to do it, particularly if you're a small organisation, you don't have lots of resources to make loads of different things. But actually, if we're going to do this, then we need to milk it for all it's worth, don't we? We need to make sure we can share it when we've got limited resources. So let's think about the different places that you might want to talk about your impact. And some of these may be ways that you could do so. We saw when we did the Google Docs that how many different kinds of stakeholder groups you want to think about it. So we looked at staff, beneficiaries, volunteers, etc. So there's lots of different places that those people are going to be looking. So what we want to do is use our one-pager, milk it for all it's worth, bring it to death in terms of squeezing out all its value, and recognise the effort you're going to put in with it. There's also another reason to do so, and we're going to look at ways of doing so in a minute with some more examples. And that helps you think about how you're consistent with your impact. Now, I fully take on board the comments mentioned about how everyone wants something different. Everyone wants their own slice of the pie and their own way of looking at it. But actually, when you're communicating as an organisation, even a small one, you have a tone of voice. You have a brand, you have an identity in some way. And actually, if you're saying one thing in one place and something else somewhere else, there's a risk that's going to be noticed, and the impact you actually have may well be diluted. So thinking about how we can squeeze everything from our impact report is not just efficient and effective in terms of the use of our resources as a small organisation, but actually going to make a much stronger case for support, whether that's for support from funders, investors, donors, or support from staff, or support from volunteers, or even engaging your beneficiaries. So we're going to look at a way that we can think about how can we really use our impact report to talk really effectively with as many people as possible. So these are just some of the places that you might want to be thinking about, and some of them may be very obvious, like donor reports and funding applications. But you also maybe want to be thinking about how you share your impact in recruitment, or trustee and induction materials as well. So let's have a look at how some organisations have really squeezed everything they can out of their impact report and the ways that they might have used it, particularly on social media. So this is a Welsh organisation that works to support people who are homeless. I'm going to pronounce it wrong because I don't know if I'm assuming it's Wally. I'm going to get it wrong. So I'm happy to be corrected by somebody on that. But they work across Wales and relatively big. But I thought this is a really nice way of doing it. Now, clearly everything is dual language. It's in Welsh and in English. So I thought, if it was just in one language, it would be a one-pager officially, but I think it gives a really good sense of what it is they do and I'm going to show how they've used that in their messaging. So let's just check in. What have they included here? Well, we've clearly got a logo and their kind of name, time frame. So it's the April to March 2020, April 19th to March 2020 time frame. We get a good sense of their need just from here. So their need is across Wales. It's about supporting skills and success, about providing properties, and what they do in relation to that. So providing bed spaces and upskilling people. We've also got a sense of outputs in terms of the hours that are committed and the outcomes, changes that are felt and impacted by the organisation. So they've done a good chunk of our kind of tick list. Finally, they've got some lovely contact information on the bottom. So how did Warwick use that? How did they use this to squeeze everything they could out of it? So this was in September last year when they launched the impact report. They didn't just write a report. They thought, how can they make the most of it? They designed graphics. They'd obviously invested in making these graphics look really effective for them, in line with their brand, in line with their narrative. So how could they use them? Here are 3 different social media posts from around the time they launched their impact report: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. And I'm sure you can see that they've basically used the same text, the same graphic, taken it directly from their impact report, but made it shareable and used that. So they've squeezed everything from it. They've thought, how can we make sure we're not just writing an impact report and it sits in our annual report and no one ever looks at it? We're going to get it out there. We're going to use that imagery in 3 different platforms in the same way, and actually using a tool like Hootsuite, and I'm sure there are others. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but makes it very simple to publish that. And as Antonia says, using something like Canva can convert it into, you can say, make this a Facebook post, make this a Twitter post, and it puts it into exactly the right dimensions and format for you. So very easy to do. And they've all linked to this link here, which is obviously they've shortened to make it accessible, and it all links to this one page, which is a website. Again, a page on their website which uses the same graphics, same images, same sections for impact report to make it clear and accessible to anyone who comes to that page. These arrows at the side just allow you to scroll through the different sections of the report, and there's a link to the full report as well. They haven't had to write new copy or design new graphics. They've used what they've got and they've really made it work for them. So what about a much smaller organisation? Can they do the same thing? Let's have a look, shall we? So this is an example of an organisation based in Merton, so southwest London. The Merton Centre for Independent Living, or Merton SIL, and they're a user-led pan-disability, deaf and disabled people's organisation based in that particular London borough. The work they do is to address the marginalisation of deaf and disabled people, and they try and have a broader impact on Merton's community as well. Their turnover is around £350,000 a year, and they're very conscious of their beneficiary group and making their material very accessible for everyone. So they've really thought about the way that they want their impact report to look. It has to chime again with their brand, with their identity, who they are, but also how they want to engage with their particular stakeholders. And they know that they want to use this just as much for beneficiary engagement and support and recruitment as they do with talking to funders. So they've really thought about the way it looks and made sure it works for them. So let's have a look. Again, some really nice, they haven't got their name really obvious on the front of it, but it sits on their website, so it's there. But they, we've got some data around that. We can see their name is right at the centre of that first page. We're clear on what the need is. It's right up there in the corner. And we've got some lovely information about the outputs and the impact that it has on their users as well. We've also got some lovely quotes in here, and they've also thought slightly bigger about, because one of their kind of areas of work that they want to do is have a broader reach. They've thought about the increase in members and the unique visitors to their website. So they've thought about what else might be of interest. So there's a lot in here, and maybe you might disagree, but I don't think it's particularly hard to unpack and digest. And by creating snippets of information in this really easy to access format, they've made it very easy for themselves in order to, it's a bit like impact, yeah, it is a bit, made it easy for them to share it. So let's look at how they might have done that. So here we are, a couple of social media posts, and I'm sure you can see they've used that imagery, which really lends itself particularly to recruitment and to engagement with their cause and what they do, lends itself to social media. So they've used it to, in this case, to sign people, post people to the report, as the first Facebook post says on the left-hand side, but also to get engagement in other ways. So whereas the image here with the heart, is to drive engagement with an annual survey. So they've really thought about using that. Can give us your feedback, tell us what you're doing. So they're in fact using their impact report to gather data for the next impact report. Genius. But they've also used it to celebrate the impact of their craftivism and chat. It's used as a recruitment tool for new courses taking place. And yeah, absolutely, Emily, they completely designed it for sharing on social media. They've thought so cleverly about how, if we're going to do this, how can we make it work for us? They know that as a small organisation, turnover, 300,000, Social media is going to be their main tool of engagement for supporters, for beneficiaries. They know that. So they really thought about what it looks like and how it works for them. So I love this example. I think it's a really nice one. So finally, when you're thinking about designing your impact report and pulling it together, think about why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, but also how you're going to share it. Who is going to be accessing this? Where are they going to access it? You know, is it on your website? Is it on your social media feeds? As Antonia said, can it be turned into a video and used on YouTube? What kind of people do you want to think about to access information? And think about doing it in a way that works for you. So you can always share the bits that matter to those people on those platforms. So we know from the exercise we did earlier that yes, there are going to be differences on what some people want. Some people want the quantitative, some people want the qualitative, some people want the stories, some people want the hard facts. If you've got a mixture and you can highlight those bits to those people, then it can make it a lot easier for you. And doesn't need to be a long, hard exercise. Writing a simple list of who you want to understand your impact, where they hang out and where they're going to access that information can help you really make the most of the impact reporting you're going to do. Okay, right, now back over to you, Antonia, are we? To wrap up.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Leah. I love that example of using an impact report to collect further data. And so just a few tips. This is just from us. We're hoping to hear more from you and to invite you to join the conversation. Ideally, you can add questions to the Q&A if you like, but we'd love to see your faces if you'd like to jump into the room with us. So a few tips just to round it all up. So just making sure that it really fits in with your impact practice cycle and that you're really focusing on what matters and you've got that consistent message. You can always make tweaks and improvements as you go around each time. Really thinking just what Leah's just been talking about those different audiences, and how you might be able to highlight some of the different important messages on different platforms. Just very simply get feedback and try it out. Sort of maybe someone who knows your organisation well, some volunteers, get an external perspective, get your trustees to take a look, a close funder. We at Coalition for Efficiency run impact chats, which are available for small organisations. And it's just an hour's conversation with myself or my colleague Angela or one of our volunteers. If you just want a sort of objective view and see if we can help you to improve on the messaging. And if you are able to use these different digital tools, or even if you're using a Google Doc or a Word document, if you've got clear categories, you can make it easy to update. So whether you're doing it for a different program or the following year, it doesn't feel like you're starting from scratch again. So develop a template that can work for you. Something around assigning ownership, especially in smaller teams. You know, you're all juggling different responsibilities. So is it assigning ownership to one specific person? Can you develop a kind of impact working group so that you revisit this and it's just built into your planning for the year? Maybe it ties in with your annual reporting cycle. Or maybe that you decide to do it every 2 years for the whole organisation, but you know, making sure that there's ownership and sort of proper planning behind it. And then this last point around experimenting with digital tools. A lot of you have mentioned Canva, and maybe Kate, you can join the conversation in a bit if you feel like it. But we are looking into trying to provide a bit more support there, because you've seen how helpful it can be from some of the examples that Leah provided. And you don't need to be a tech whiz to set all of that up. So we would encourage you to have a play around, and hopefully we can provide some support for you to do that. And then just before we go into our have a chat, in case we lose some of you, we just wanted to do a quick Mentimeter poll to round up. So there's
put the link in the chat. You should be able to click on it or go to menti.com and enter that code. So I'll just share the Menti screen again.
So again, just two questions.
There we go, brilliant. Share that on the screen now.
We'll share the answer.
Fantastic. I'm going to refresh it because it seems to be not very happy about refreshing itself randomly. I don't know why. Normally it zings up and down, doesn't it? But it's seems a bit, I don't know why. But I'll just refresh it once more, and then we'll move on to the question as well. Yeah, it keeps picking up more people every time I refresh it, so I'm not sure why it's not doing it itself. Anyway, brilliant. Oh, we're still got one person who's not confident, Antonia.
Yeah.
Maybe they can kind of have a chat with us as to why not.
I'll share the link for our impact chat. So to that person, do just get in touch with us, and we can see how we can help you to feel a bit more confident. There has been a bit more of a shift to the right. And there is interest in some kind of further sessions or training to use digital tools to help you do this better. Okay, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you very much.
And I think that's it from the slides. There was just a final resources slide. Which is also in the link to the template, but we'll share those slides afterwards as well. But Inspiring Impact have got some really just useful resources on that sort of final part of the impact cycle. You've got some infographic Canva templates, which Superhighway shared with me, the nonprofit package, a couple of useful guides and tools, and some Measuring the Good resources. So Measuring the Good is part of Coalition for Efficiency. So we've got a learning lab from a recording of Leah, which is a great session on how specifically to communicate impact to generate income. And we've also got a Google Sheets impact framework, which you can save a copy, save your own version, and use any of the tabs that are going to be useful. But that essentially has both the measurement framework as well as other tips around data collection and communicating your impact. So we'll make sure we share all of those with you. But now enough. We'll stop sharing the slides. I was about to say enough from us. Obviously, we will answer your questions if you have them, but I think that there's clearly a lot of knowledge in the room, and we would just love if anyone would like to join us and maybe share something that's worked, that's some challenges that you managed to overcome. I'm sure we'd all love to hear it. So please join us if you can. Just click
Ali's just mentioned in the chat that accessing the links on the resources page, they'll be in the slide pack, which will be accessible. Is that right?
They'll be on the slide pack, and I did actually add them. I'll share it again. I added them to the template, the checklist one pager, just so that you've got the link straight away. So
yeah,
put that there.
We'll put it back in. So that was the example document with the boxes, the colour boxes, the things to put in a one-page impact report. There's a second slide on there which has got all those links for you.
But I will also make the slides available through, I'm expecting, through the platform, and the recording is obviously going to be available too. Anyone want to jump in the room? Because we've finished a bit ahead of time. We're given quite a generous slot of 90 minutes, but as we didn't have a long breakout session, we've managed to keep it a bit shorter.
They're all scared of us. we won't bite.
No.
Or if you don't want to, then feel free to put some comments in the chat or the Q&A as well. If you wanted to ask us a question about anything. Probably should be impact related, but so how do you share lessons learned with donors? Oh, that's a really good question, Natasha. Thank you for asking that. I mean, so my background is fundraising. Shall I take this one, Antonia? I think reality is most funders just are very, very happy and very open to finding out what worked and what didn't. And I think being honest and open not only helps you develop a relationship with a funder, but helps you in your future engagement with them as well. Because if they can see that you've actually thought about what you've done, you've not just blindly, gone on the, oh, we said we'd do this, so we did this. Actually, it's not worked. Actually, if something hasn't worked, it's for you to understand why it isn't. So rather than just saying it didn't work, make sure you say it didn't work, but actually what we did to adapt to that was this, and we tried this, and that was a bit more effective. So I think thinking about, be honest and share when it didn't work, but talk them about what you did about it. Because then when you go back to them for future funding, you can say, we've refined our model based on our lessons learned, on how we did. It allows you to be more honest. Otherwise, they will be like, why have you changed it? Why have you changed it? Why is it not the same? That's really good to know, Mac, that you're absolutely pushing for that. And I think generally, I mean, the more intelligent, that sounds awful, but the more educated, more enlightened funders absolutely are very interested in this and actually want to know what you've done differently, and why things have changed, because that's the only way they learn as a funder as well, how to other organizations. So I think be honest, talk about the change, talk about what you did. Don't be afraid of it. Natasha.
Responding to, thanks Leah, responding to Busola's question about you created a theory of change, well done. And it's about converting into measures. So we shared this resource previously, the Understanding Impact Guide. I really recommend you work through that, because essentially MPC have also developed a theory of change guide, but the Understanding Impact helps you to think about how to translate your theory of change. And actually, I just checked the program. There's a session that started 5 minutes ago, but you're welcome to leave this session that's called, I've just put it in here, it's Measuring What Matters, 5 Types of Data, that MPC are running right now in one of the other session rooms. So it might be worth you joining that session, Busola, for some tips, because I think they're also talking about the links between the 5 types of data and how that relates to your theory of change. And
not we're trying to get rid of you guys, but John also, John, your question actually as well, the same thing really applies to kind of thinking about how you determine what you can measure in order to show impact. A similar kind of that link as well that Antonia shared, and that session might be useful. It's something we're trying to get rid of everyone now, Antonia. Go to MPC session. Wrong commission. Right, James has just asked a question here about struggling taking the first step from learning from our impact to making practical changes to how work is delivered. Any tips or experiences? Do you want to go there, or do you want me to? John?
Yeah, well, I think we've probably got different things things to share. Yeah, I think it's also sort of part of like just building that into your kind of decision-making processes, and making sure that you're actually making time as a team to come back and digest all the information that you've collected and how that can feed in. I just listened into the Street League session earlier today, which was essentially talking about how they were learning and adapting through COVID. And I think it's really worth taking a look at that session, James, as a good example.
I think as well, if you realise from impact that things maybe aren't working, understanding why they weren't working and making sure you think about the different perspectives on that. So, you know, whether it's involving your beneficiaries and getting people who've experienced the services to talk to you about what you know, if the impact hasn't been what you've expected, making sure you listen to the different voices to help you understand why that impact wasn't achieved, and using that to adapt and make the changes to your service might be a very useful thing. Because I think sometimes we look at the data and go, oh, not worked. Actually, why? What's not worked? Is it the wrong time of day? Is it the wrong length of activity? What is it that's not working? So make sure you capture those different voices, and maybe actually get some of your beneficiaries involved and look at a process of co-production and co-design that helps you evaluate that process. And actually funders will really welcome that, in looking at how you're involving the people with the experience, lived experience, or your beneficiaries to help you view that work.
And it's just made me think, I remember there was a session, I think it was at a Social Value UK conference. It might have been Ben Carpenter who mentioned this, but actually as a KPI for an organisation, it would be quite interesting to actually track the changes that you make based on information that you've collected. And that could be quite an interesting measure for funders as well, that it shows that you are kind of always actually going through that cycle and reviewing and making sure that it feeds in.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Ellen's asked a question about whether you want to do a longer impact report internally with an external kind of one-pager. What do you think, Antonia?
Well, I think just from the conversation, so Ellen, I'm not sure which organisation you represent and the resources that you have. Essentially, the sort of the one pager, as we mentioned before, is both a kind of, it's a practical approach that isn't going to take up a huge amount of resources. So we're specifically thinking all the advice that we're sharing is with small organisations in mind. So it's coming back to the why. If you think internally, it's going to be really useful to do a kind of deep dive and analysis, but then is a longer impact report what you really need as an internal tool? Is there another way that you can share those findings in perhaps a more interactive way? So I think it does depend on your resources, but just essentially do come back to the why you're doing it and what you need to know.
I agree with everything. I have anything to add on that. I think, yeah, just make sure you know what your capacity is really. Doing things for the sake of it. No one needs to do that. Yeah.
And then, you know, are you going to be able to match that the following year? I think trying to get that consistent messaging is important too.
Fantastic. Well, we've still got a few more minutes. If anyone has any other questions or thoughts, you can, you know, click on that little blue button and come and have a chat with us as well if you wanted. You don't have to hide away in the chat box. No one's as brave as Christopher.
Oh, I haven't actually looked at the Q&A.
It was Ellen put the same question in.
The same question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry, Ellen, we spotted in the chat, but not in the Q&A. Okie dokes. Everyone's gone quiet. Everyone's run off to the NPC. Question, Antonia.
Okay, great. Well, I think we've covered everything that we wanted to share, but also really big thank you to those who are left. You've given us some really useful data as well, both in the Mentimeter and in that Google Doc. So thank you for that. We will digest it and use it to improve this session and how we can support you.
And if you do want to get in touch with us, then yeah, you can. I'll just put our website links for both Antonia and I in the chat there, so you can do feel free to contact us an hour if you need to. So thank you very much for coming to see us.
Great.
Bye everyone.
Bye.